Hi, and welcome to Time Travel Tuesday. My name is Lisa, and I'm an interpreter here at Historic Brattonsville. Today we're going to take a look at some of those stories and sayings that have come down to us through history, but may actually have no real historical basis. I was surprised as I researched this subject how many pieces of wisdom from days gone by are actually just nonsense. Perhaps it comes from our need to understand things. We hear about a saying or practice from the past that doesn't make sense to us, and we try to figure out how it came to be. And it turns out that we don't always get it right, even when we work at museums and should know better. One so-called fact that I often shared with our visitors as a new interpreter was that many women in the past died of burns resulting from catching their petticoats on fire. In fact, it's often said that burns were the second leading cause of death for colonial women after childbirth. In reality, there were probably cases of people dying of burns, since a fire for cooking was a regular part of life. But when you grow up around fires and work with them every day, keeping clear of the flames becomes almost second nature. Studies of death records in early America show that the number one cause of death among women was neither fire nor childbirth. It was disease. In a time before antibiotics, illnesses that are a minor convenience to us today could be fatal. Related to that, you'll notice at Historic Brattonsville that all of our historic clothes are made of natural fibers: linen, cotton, or wool. We do this to be accurate, using only the materials available at that time, but this also helps keep us safe. Natural fibers are slower to catch fire and will generally smolder first. Man-made fibers like polyester or rayon will catch quickly and often melt and stick to your skin, making the resulting burns even worse. It's commonly believed that people were shorter in years gone by than we are today. This one is a case of sort of true and sort of not. One of the easiest ways to study average height is through enlistment records. Studies show that soldiers in the Revolutionary War were only about 2/3 of an inch shorter than soldiers in the Korean War. But soldiers in the Civil War were on average 3 whole inches shorter than 21st century soldiers. So people are taller now. But most of that change happened in the 20th century and can be attributed to antibiotics and a better understanding of nutrition. Following on the short people belief is the belief that beds were also shorter, and this falls more into the myth category. In the 18th and 19th century, there was no standard size for beds, as they were often built by amateur carpenters. Nearly all of the beds that still exist from the period are as long or longer than the 75 inches of a modern double bed. They often appear shorter because they are raised higher off the floor. They may have tall bedposts or mini pillows, all of which can create the illusion of a shorter length. It's believed that people of long ago thought tomatoes and potatoes were poisonous. And both of these stories have their roots in history, but they've been exaggerated over the years. Tomatoes were brought to Europe by the Spanish in the 1500s and were eaten in many countries throughout Europe. It appears that the belief that they were poisonous was mostly confined to England and can be blamed on one source. A book that was published in 1597 stated that eating tomatoes could kill you. And for about 100 years, many Englishmen avoided them because of that. But by the late 1700s, most people in England and the Americas had noticed that the rest of Europe was eating them with no ill effects and had stopped avoiding them. Potatoes were also imported to Europe from the Americas in the 1500s, but they got on the bad food list for a different reason. Potato leaves and stems really are poisonous. Perhaps some of the first Europeans to raise them didn't realize that the edible part was underground and ate the wrong part. Regardless, by the time of the American Revolution, potatoes were a common part of the colonial diet. One story that we encounter a lot at Brattonsville is that the kitchen was separate from the house to prevent the house from burning down. While this may have been one reason, it was likely not the main one. The Homestead House has 12 fireplaces for heat, which provided plenty of opportunities for a house fire that have nothing to do with a kitchen. And in the northern states, there were very few examples of a separate kitchen. One main reason was the heat. It's not very pleasant to be cooking over a fire in August in South Carolina, and lighting a fire in the main house was avoided in the summer. Another reason was segregation. If the kitchen was not part of the main house, then the kitchen staff, who were enslaved, had no reason to be in the house. Perhaps you've heard this one. They didn't have left and right shoes back in the day, and they switched shoes back and forth on their feet so they would wear evenly. If you've ever put your shoes on the wrong feet, you know how uncomfortable that is. Imagine doing that every day. people did not rotate their shoes like we rotate tires. Shoes were made the same for both feet, but it was for economic reasons, and it only lasted about 300 years, which is a relatively short period of time in the history of footwear. In Elizabethan times, shoemakers realized that it was quicker and cheaper to make the same shoe over and over rather than make left shoes and right shoes. By about 1800, most shoemakers had returned to left and right shoes, and that practice continues today. In many old homes, the top step of the staircase is either shorter or taller than the others, posing a trip hazard. It's commonly believed that this was on purpose. The theory was that a burglar would trip on that last step, and the noise would wake the homeowner so he could catch the thief in the act. But if this was the case, one would think that the burglar would know about it and be extra careful on that last step. In fact, unless you are a master carpenter, stairs are tricky to build. An amateur builder, who might only build stairs once or twice in his life, probably didn't have the training to get the math right. When you got to that last step and found that it didn't quite fit, you might be inclined to fudge it a bit rather than tear the whole flight of stairs out and start over. And going up and down the stairs every day, the household would adapt to the one odd step. And now for one that we hear at least once a day at Brattonsville, a myth that is repeated at museums near and far and was once even stated as fact on the British version of Antiques Roadshow. The saying, "sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite," refers to tightening the ropes on a bed, except that it doesn't. In Middle English, the word that became tight today meant soundly or effectively. So to sleep tight just meant to sleep well. The unabridged edition of the Oxford English Dictionary tells us that in modern English, sleep tight is the only instance where tight retains its earlier meaning. The earliest published appearance of sleep tight, actually tight asleep, seems to come from a Pennsylvania newspaper in 1847. And the bedbugs didn't join in until the 1870s, and also appear as fleas or rats in different versions. One of the sources I consulted while researching this saying pointed out that tight refers to the bed, not the sleeper. So good night, sleep tight would seem to be addressed to the bed rather than the person, which is kind of odd. Another source wondered how difficult it would be to sleep tight or sleep at all after being reminded that you're sharing the bed with things that might bite you. So now we've explored the truth behind some of the more peculiar myths and stories from our past. Many of these and more are included in the book, Death by Petticoat, by Mary Miley Theobald. What are some sayings or stories that you've wondered about? Let us know through social media and we'll try to find the truth for you. Thanks for being here today, and be sure to join us next week for another Time Travel Tuesday.